So who are the modern day Pharisees? I see many people coming into the Bulletproof Retirement community wanting to be a Christian and be a servant of Christ. But what's clear in the Bible is that the Pharisees were always in opposition to Christ in this world of duality. Karmic evolution requires force as opposition in order to evolve. And so the Pharisees stood there as, some of the center point of the matrix. That they were the people that were, at the time of Jesus Christ, they were the teachers of the law. And we have to look at the modern day and identify who are the modern day Pharisees in order to define our actions so that we can stand opposed against them and, the opposite of that, serve Jesus Christ, for those who want to anyway. So when we look at the Bible and the many of the different passages of Christ versus the Pharisees, the first thing we know is for sure is that they were, teachers of the law, which many interpretations say they were, at the time it was the Jews, and they were, Jewish sects that were sort of in power at the time. And really, when we talk about the law in the context of at that time, really we're talking about the Old Testament. And that's why they call it the Old Test, because when Christ comes along, that's when you either choose the Old Test or you are following the New Testament, the New Test where you're a follower of Christ. You can't really do both. And it's interesting because I see a lot of people, trying to talk about like all these different places, but you have to be very specific in your actions in terms of whether you're following Christ or whether you're doing the opposite. So the Pharisees always stood opposed to Christ. They always paid lip service, but in their hearts they were full of wickedness and greed. And the other thing that Jesus always said about them was that they were ultimately hypocrites. So again, saying one thing, saying, you're serving God, doing this, but then on the other hand, what are you really doing but serving yourself and enforcing a system of slavery? So if the Pharisees at the time were teaching the law, they were still opposed to God's law, because Christ only said two things: love God above all else, and love your brothers and sisters as you would yourself, the common law. So those are God's laws. And everything else above that, all the little intricacies and minutiae, that's all the creation of man, basically. And that's what Christ was saying at that time. So when we look at today, the common law is still around. English common law is the basis for every judicial system in the entire world, pretty much. But when we look above the common law, what's layered on top of that? It's the statutes and codes that reinforce the matrix. So when you look at the teachers of those statutes and codes, that's where we can actually look to see who the modern day Pharisees are. So we're looking at pretty much any kind of public agent, any kind of lawyer, accountant, even people like priests. I mean, the Pharisees were in league with the priests, and all these groups of people, they're all part of the power structures that control the matrix. Anytime you see like just millions and millions of people just following something blindly, I mean, that's pretty much the teachings of the Pharisees. And this will probably offend many people who, follow those sorts of things or put stock or credence in them. But part of this game is to, channel our awareness into a place where we're not paying attention to the Pharisees, and we're only putting our time and energy into serving Christ. So what does that mean from a practical perspective? Well, the Pharisees are talking about all these statutes and codes. So they're saying, oh, you got to do all these little specific things, jump through all these hoops, and then, do it all again, and do it again and again, and then get everyone else around you to do it. Because, the matrix is a culture of fear and control. It's highly psychological. people come into my group and they'll get on a call with me and ask me, oh, is this trust too good to be true? But the reality is so few people do it because everyone around them tells them not to do it. So it's far from too good to be true. It's just something where very few people will ever even know about it because of their psychological state of mind, their state of consciousness. And of the ones that do find out about it, very few will walk that path because of the fear and the control of the matrix and of the influencers and of the Pharisees, ultimately. So part of what I would do if I were you is, start looking at the people that you're listening to for advice particularly when it comes to financial matters. If you're listening to lawyers or accountants, then I hope your goal is to stay a slave and is to file taxes every year and is to jump through a lot of hoops. If all that sounds great to you, then I'm great, keep doing it. Because I speak to many business owners, really wealthy. They have all these assets and all these different things in their name, which is what you're taught to do in the Matrix. You're taught to own things and, just build up this huge net worth. But then you have this big liability, and then now you're in the grasp of the Pharisees, and you're listening to them. You're filing all these little forms and checking all these little boxes, and you're not following the common law. You're not treating your brothers and sisters as you want to be treated when you're participating in a system of slavery. Same thing with the priests. They're all preaching from their pedestals, but what are they actually doing when it comes to the common law? That's all that Christ said to do. Follow the common law. Very fucking simple. And yet so few people are actually capable of doing it. It's really remarkable. Even myself, as much as I try to do it, there's constantly influences, battering me around, trying to pull me in these different directions. And oftentimes I feel like a little small boat on a stormy sea. It's very difficult to cut a true path when everyone around you is just following blindly the lies that reinforce this control structure, this matrix that we happen to be in. So ultimately, if you want to call yourself a Christian, if you want to call yourself a servant of Christ, then you need to be in opposition of the Pharisees. You need to be opposed to them. You need to be calling their hypocrisy out. So if they're following these little statutes and codes, you need to call that out. If they're flashing across at you, but they're not actually following the common law, what good is that? That's more hypocrisy. That's more of the cleaning the cup on the outside, but having that wickedness and greed in your heart on the inside. Just because you flash across and do things on the outside, just because you go to church on a Sunday, what does that have to do with following the common law? If anything, that's against the common law. You're just wasting fucking time. You're sitting in a church listening to some priest who has no context of the common law with a bunch of people who are sheep, who are just blindly there thinking, hoping, crossing their fingers that they're doing good. But you're not. You're reinforcing the matrix, which means you're reinforcing slavery and you're reinforcing the slavery of everyone around you. So I know those are harsh words, but, Christ was clear. I didn't say to go against the Pharisees. He did. And he did it multiple times, and he called them out again and again and again. It's one of the most prevalent themes throughout the New Testament of the Bible. And, that's why there's a New Test and an Old Test. They're separate things and separate bodies of work. And before Christ came along, everyone was following the Old Testament. Fine, that was the law at the time. But when Jesus Christ came along, that's when people realized, wow, there's a way to follow God that's different from what these other people are saying. And you may disagree, some people would rather, most people in the Matrix would rather follow the Pharisees. But there's a handful that saw Christ, that saw what he was doing. They saw that he was hanging out with the sinners and hanging out with the people who really wanted redemption. And they saw that through Christ, there was a way for anyone to gain that state of consciousness by just following in the same path. So part of how you're going to define your actions is how you find opposition to what not to do. And there's plenty of that out there, but I just wanted to summarize in this video what some of the power structures are, just so everyone has a clear idea. If you're listening to certain influences and you think you're a Christian or a follower of Christ, those two things are not compatible. You can't be a follower of the Pharisees and a follower of Christ. It doesn't work. So if you want to learn more about the specifics of how to do that and how we use a private trust, to give everything over to God and everything over to Jesus Christ, so we have nothing at all, not our bodies, not our souls, not our minds, not our assets, nothing in the domain of the Pharisees, then jump in the Bulletproof Retirement community. We talk about a lot of different topics, whether it's the pragmatic side of the little ins and outs of how to do a trust and how to set it up, and also the more spiritual overarching sides of, how to just be a good servant of Christ and how to live in a way that, doesn't harm your brothers and sisters and shows them love. And that's, ultimately what my goal of this channel is. For most of my life, I actually considered myself agnostic or an atheist, which is really interesting. But once I actually saw a tangible, concrete path that wasn't just like this hocus pocus, oh, I'm going to worship up into the air, because that never made any sense to me. But following the common law does. Because, just as a very basic matter, like, why would I want to harm anyone else? Why would I want to cause myself that kind of stress, let alone the stress and the chaos that would cause to others around me? So karmically, I am trying my best to control my own actions in such a way where, I'm moving into a place that actually follows Christ and follows others of Christ consciousness. And in doing so, I can push outwards on those who are in opposition to that. So many of the Pharisees, and even people who are still trying to find the path, there needs to be opposition in order to see, okay, this is the right way, this is the wrong way, and now I'm going to make a choice. Which way am I going to go? And that is going to define your karma. So I look forward to seeing many of you inside the community. And for the rest of you, I wish you the best of luck. It's very tough out there to really navigate these nuances. And, listening to the big preachers and the big guys with millions of followers, they're all doing it wrong. Pretty much all of them. So, that's just the way it is. Talk to you guys in the next one.